This video is sponsored by LastPass. What's up guys, Mike here, the Detroit Borg, taking a look at a comparison of two of my favorite phones of the year, the iPhone XS Max versus the Google Pixel 3 XL. The first big difference between these two phones is pricing. $200 separates them. So the Pixel 3 XL starts at $899 while the iPhone XS Max starts at $1099. That gets you 64 gigs to start. You can double storage on the Pixel 3 XL to 128 for only $100 more, but adding storage on the iPhone XS Max gets more expensive but more generous. The size of each device is almost identical. Both of them are 158 millimeters tall and around 77 millimeters wide. iPhone is a bit heavier at 208 grams versus 184 grams. And that weight difference probably comes down to the different materials they're using. So the iPhone is using stainless steel, while the Pixel 3 XL is using an aluminum frame. I have to say that weight difference is definitely noticeable. I actually really like the way the Pixel feels because it's so much lighter. That's actually kind of important for a large screen device, especially since you spend more time sort of shifting the phone around to reach around on the screen. Both of them have glass on the front and back, which are curved at the edges to meet the frame. Now, what's kind of interesting is that the frame on the Pixel 3 is coated for this very glossy finish, while the iPhone XS goes for a polished stainless steel. It definitely looks quite a bit more high-end, but that glossy finish looks quite nice, especially on the black Pixel 3. The other benefit here is that this finish hides any of the antenna strips, so it looks a little neater. Something I really like about the glass on the Pixel 3 is that it's etched on the back, so it gives you this sort of silky matte texture. Again, the glass on the iPhone looks a little more premium because of that jeweled-like mirror finish, which matches the stainless steel. Because of the glass back panel, both phones have wireless charging, which is new for the Pixel this year, and also both phones are IP68 water resistant. Although the devices are roughly the same size, the XS Max does have a bigger 6.5-inch display over the 6.3-inch display, but the Pixel 3 has a higher resolution display, 1440 by 2960 versus 1242 by 2688. So that gives the Pixel 3 a density of 523 versus 458, so it's a good thing Pixel is in the name. Now once you get to pixel density above 400, it's actually hard to tell the difference, so either way both displays look extremely sharp. Both displays support HDR, DCI-P3, and more, so for the most part the color balance looks fantastic and roughly the same on both of them. The only thing I notice about the Pixel 3 is that it's not quite as bright as the iPhone XS Max. iPhone does have a few other technologies which the Pixel 3 doesn't have, such as 120Hz refresh rate for the touch sensor. iPhone also has 3D touch, which is becoming less important, but again, this is used for pressure sensitivity. So it's used in certain parts of the interface, such as bringing up quick actions or the trackpad within the keyboard, but a lot of this is also done with just long presses on Pixel. Another feature iPhone is known for that the Pixel 3 is almost matching here is the taptic motor, which provides really precise haptic feedback. So the Pixel 3 almost matches the exact same haptic feedback as the iPhone, which I think is pretty surprising. Now certainly these displays look fantastic, but the design execution is quite different. Obviously we don't have the uniform bezel surrounding the screen like we do with the iPhone XS Max, so the Pixel has a pretty prominent chin and that does leave a space for the stereo speaker, but even though we have a chin, the display goes all the way toward the top, which leaves us with a very prominent notch. That notch is quite a bit taller than we've seen from other phones, so it really stands out. But the one thing in its favor compared to the iPhone is that there's more space on either side because it's not as wide. Now that's useful for Android because you have the notifications in the upper left corner, so you want a little more space for those badges. And the other advantage is you have more room for the battery percentage indicator, which is something you can't get on the iPhone. Each phone uses their notch for very different reasons. So the Pixel uses it for a dual camera setup. Both cameras are 8 megapixels. One's a standard wide-angle f1.8 aperture. The other is a ultra-wide f2.2 aperture. So essentially you get a wide-angle lens for getting more people in your shot. But the iPhone uses this for the front-facing camera and Face ID, which uses a bunch of sensors to map your face for authentication. One area where I think iPhone XS has a clear lead over the Pixel is biometrics. So Face ID is a much more frictionless way of authenticating passcodes, making payments, or just unlocking your phone. Although the fingerprint scanner on the Pixel 3 is fast and well placed, it's still quite a bit more cumbersome to use, especially since you have to be holding the phone a certain way in order for your finger to land in the right spot. And obviously you can't be wearing gloves and you can't do this hands-free. Now it's somewhat debatable on what method is quicker to unlock your device. I actually think that the fingerprint sensor can be quicker just because if you place your fingerprint, it unlocks right away. It takes you right to the home screen, bypasses everything. Now with Face Unlock, you have to wake it up, scan your face, and swipe to get home. Regardless of what biometric technology you prefer for security, both work with LastPass. So like everybody else, I have countless usernames and passwords to generate and remember, and that leads to some bad habits, such as writing them down or using the same password for every account. Obviously, we know this is the wrong thing to do because if just one password gets leaked, you have potentially compromised many of your other accounts. Fortunately, LastPass has a solution for this by generating and storing all of your account passwords for you. The only password you have to remember is the one for your LastPass account. So this means you are free to use unique and complex passwords for all of your accounts, and the key reason I really like LastPass is that it's cross-platform. I can use it on both my Android phone, my iPhone, my Mac, my Windows machine, and more. And the great thing about LastPass is that it works with autofill. So this works on both Android and iOS. So basically, this automatically fills in your username and password, and all you have to do is authenticate, and that's where Face ID or the fingerprint scanner comes in handy. LastPass also supports multi-factor authentication, so if you really want to secure your LastPass master password, you can use services such as YubiKey, Microsoft, and many more. Once again, I want to thank LastPass for sponsoring this video, and if you want to check it out yourself, make sure you click the link in the description below. Pixel 3 consolidates all of its buttons along the right side, so we have the power and the volume rocker, but the iPhone splits it between the right and left side. But the Pixel 3 has another feature that the iPhone doesn't, which is something called an Active Edge. So you can squeeze the phone in order to activate the Google Voice Assistant. And to activate Siri, you long press the power button. But of course, you can also command the voice assistant whether the phone is locked or not. At the bottom edge, we'll find something else these devices have in common, which is the lack of a headphone jack. But at least the Pixel 3 still includes a headphone jack adapter in the box, which the iPhone gave up. But otherwise, things are quite a bit different down here. So we have USB-C versus Lightning for the iPhone XS. And of course, we have these down-facing stereo speakers and microphones on the iPhone XS, which we don't have on the Pixel. And that's because the Pixel has front-facing stereo speakers, one in the earpiece and one in the chin. iPhone also has stereo speakers, but only the earpiece actually faces the user. Now, I could spend a lot of time talking about these speakers, but for the most part, they're just as loud as each other, so I was able to get about 91 decibels at best. But there's a big difference in terms of sound quality. The iPhone speakers are a bit better balanced, so they sound the same on the top and bottom, while the Pixel 3 clearly has a much louder speaker at the bottom of the phone than at the top. Pixel 3 definitely has more bass. In fact, the entire phone vibrates, but it also adds to this sort of muffled sound to the phone that I don't really care for. But the audio on the iPhone sounds extremely clean and precise, so there's no background noise, no distortion. It's just nice and clean, but it's probably not the best phone if you want to listen to music from a distance. In terms of specs, both phones get 4 gigs of RAM, which is kind of low on the Android side, but that's pretty high for iPhone. But in terms of performance overall, there's a pretty big difference here, and that's because we have that powerful A12 CPU in the iPhone XS Max. So we're seeing double the single-core score of the Snapdragon 845 in the Pixel 3. I'm always reluctant to talk about battery life just because it varies so much depending on the software you're running, background processes, screen brightness, and much more. But the Pixel 3 does get the biggest battery here, 3,430 mAh versus 3,174 for the iPhone XS Max. Generally speaking, iPhone is much better at consistency. The Pixel 3 can have great battery life one day and then get zapped the next day, so it really depends, again, on the background apps. But generally speaking, I do get all-day battery life with at least 6 hours of screen on time. Now, I'm not going to do a detailed software comparison just because I could go on for hours, but there's a few features that Pixel 3 has that I wish iPhone had. So for example, we have the always on display, which will persistently show you your date and time, notifications, weather, and more. But the most significant feature missing on iPhone is split screen mode. So you can open up 2 apps side by side on Android. We even have a picture-in-picture mode for our video player. So for example, YouTube, I could play a YouTube clip while navigating through the interface, all without leaving the YouTube viewer. For the most part, Android 9 and iOS 12 have quite a bit in common in terms of their interface convention. So the way you interact with each phone is actually surprisingly similar now. Although Android 9 still has a classic home button, we still have a gesture-based interface for basically everything else. So for example, you swipe up quickly to get to your recent apps viewer, and you swipe up further to get to the app drawer. You can also swipe across the bottom of the screen to navigate through your recent apps. Moving on to the camera comparison, obviously there's a big difference here in terms of hardware, but the differences aren't as big as you think. So the iPhone has two 12-megapixel cameras, one with an f1.8 aperture, and that's the wide-angle lens, and then we have a telephoto camera with an f2.4 aperture with 2x optical zoom. Both of them are optically stabilized. Pixel 3 gets a 12.2 megapixel wide-angle lens with an f1.8 aperture, also with optical image stabilization. So because the iPhone has 2x optical zoom, you do get better zoom quality on the iPhone, although some computational magic on the Pixel means you get pretty good quality as well with just digital zoom. Because we have these dual cameras, we have depth perception, which the camera can use for portrait modes. So this allows iPhone to more accurately detect the distance between the foreground and the background. So not only can iPhone simulate a shallow depth of field, you can even change the depth of field before or after you've taken the photograph. The effect even changes the optics of the bokeh in the background. Pixel 3 also has a portrait mode, but uses more computational methods like facial recognition to achieve a similar effect. Although you don't get the same features as iPhone, the effect is relatively similar, although not as accurate. So you still run into issues at the perimeter of the foreground subject, which iPhone has largely overcome. Now, if you have well-lit images, both cameras behave very similar to each other. We get the same dynamic range, the same shallow depth of field, the same color profile, and for the most part, the same sharpness. iPhone does get a new feature this year called Smart HDR, which tends to reduce contrast more than the Pixel but brings up shadows, softens highlights, and tends to warm up color saturation. So it tends to make images look sharper than Pixel, but some tend to think it looks overprocessed and flattened. Pixel HDR generally does a better job preserving the dynamic range of an image, even if I think most people will prefer the detail and color from Smart HDR. Like all smartphones, the true test of a camera software is what it does in low light, and these phones couldn't be more different. Smart HDR on iPhone once again does a great job bringing up shadows, softening highlights, and bringing up the color without oversaturation or color noise. Pixel, on the other hand, tends to ramp up saturation while also preserving contrast and low light detail without flattening the image as much as iPhone. I definitely tend to favor what the Pixel does because I like the dynamic range and color vibrancy, even if the color profile tends to be somewhat inconsistent or unnatural, and there tends to be more color noise or distortion in the image. I do think iPhone does a better job producing a clean image which you can edit later. But the Pixel goes a big step further with a feature called Night Sight. This mode behaves a little like a long exposure mode and prompts you to hold steady while it's capturing the image, but the results are truly remarkable. It's literally the difference between night and day, and something iPhone certainly can't do inside the camera app. It brings up detail you had no idea was in the image, and what's truly remarkable is the way it finds color in an image, especially when there's no light to begin with. Most long exposure modes tend to oversaturate, but Night Sight manages to preserve a natural color range, which is a big part of what makes these images so stunning. In terms of video, both of them are excellent. Both support 4K, but only the iPhone does it at 60 frames per second. Side by side, I definitely think the iPhone looks better. It's sharper and brighter with better color saturation. But side by side, you can see there's a big difference in terms of stabilization. So as I'm walking, you can clearly see the bouncing with the iPhone XS Max, but with Google, it's completely smoothed out, almost to the point it looks like it's on a gimbal. So again, that's not really optical stabilization doing that, that's electronic stabilization, and Google definitely has that computational magic going on. In terms of the front-facing video, they're actually pretty similar overall. We have 1080p video recording, but the iPhone does it up to 60 frames per second versus 30 frames per second only for the Pixel. Generally speaking, exposure is pretty good, but the iPhone seems to have an edge overall. As you can see, the exposure through the windows is quite a bit more evened out for the iPhone. You can actually see better through the windows. And as you can tell, the stereo microphones on the iPhone sound quite a bit better than those on the Pixel. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed this comparison video. This is something of an experiment for me. Normally I don't like to do comparisons, but I thought it was pretty interesting because I think these phones are pretty equally matched, even though they're very different in terms of their platforms. Hopefully I did not upset anybody. I don't want to be controversial. I want to be fair to these devices. So if I've done something that you think I should have done differently, please let me know in the comment section below. And if you guys like this video and would like to see more comparisons in the future, please let me know with a like, and I'll see you again in my next video.